solution. We're going to hear two stories tonight. So, without more ado, take it away, Huck.
Thank you, Saffia. I should say I'm Huckleberry Hax, not Huckleberry Finn, but an easy mistake to make.
Sorry.
Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning. So my name is Huckleberry Hax, and I write stories using the metaverse as my inspiration. Some of them set in it, some of them set concerning it. And for the last few years, I've been writing some short stories about a group of people who meet every month to they're all metaversians, so they all live in the world of Second Life, if you will, or a similar virtual world. Second Life is never actually named, but they meet up in real life for a meal once a month, where they maintain their metaverse characters and roles. So they use the same names that they would use in the metaverse, and they refer to their roles. So there's about a group of 7 of them, and then every month they invite a virtual guest to attend via a laptop at the end of the table in the restaurant that they eat in, and they talk about metaverse affairs, and typically a mystery of some description comes up or gets resolved. And I was inspired to write this series of stories, which is several years ago I started now, by the Isaac Asimov Black Widowers similar banquet tales, where a group of people would get together once a month for a meal to solve a mystery. So I've written 13 so far, and tonight I'm going to read 2. One is going to be one of my personal favourites, which is called Some Fatal Cross Posts. I've become quite interested over the years, wrote a couple of blog articles about the issue of writing into somebody's IM window a comment about them, which was intended to be sent to somebody else's IM window. That horror moment you get when you realise what you've just done. And then the second story I'm going to read is a brand new, never before heard Avatar Dining Club mystery. So this is the 14th story, which is called The Director's Explosion. Yeah, the wrong window horror, absolutely. Without further ado, I think I'll jump straight in, because I know that we want to finish on the hour if possible. I will mention that if you want to read the stories, you can visit my website, but also on my website there's a link to YouTube, where the stories have all been, the 13 stories so far have all been turned into podcasts. So if you're interested in hearing some more of these stories, you can listen to them all on YouTube. If that's or on your favorite podcast delivery system, whichever that might be. So without further ado, let's get cracking on the first of tonight's stories. This is called Some Fatal Cross Posts. As predicted, the 6th meeting of the Avatar Dining Club spent a not inconsiderable amount of time attending to the matter of the virtual world's divorce of club member Rainy September from her only very recently acquired metaverse husband. Rainy took it upon herself to announce this new and entirely unsurprising turn of events just as the waiter, Enrico, had finished putting our food in front of us. "Listen, everyone, I've got something to say," she said, waiting until the young builder to my left, raw concrete, had put down with great reluctance the slice of pizza that had come so tantalizingly close to his open mouth. "I've split up with Rocker." She held out her hands, palm outwards in a halting manner, as a chorus of concern broke out from club founder Edward, fashion blogger Marianne Middlemarch, nightclub owner and skin designer Indigo Williams, and photographer Jennifer Bitt. I'm okay," she reassured us. "It was nearly 3 weeks ago now, and I'm over it. I just wanted you to know." "What happened?" Indigo was the first to get the question in, taking a long sip of white wine after she'd posed it, that seemed to suggest she was settling in for a lengthy conversation. I took that as my cue to plunge my fork into my carbonara, and Raw took that as his cue to resume his attack on his pizza. "Oh, it's funny now I can look back on it," Rainey said, pleased with this permission to tell her tale. "The idiot Fatal Cross posted me. Much as it hurt me at the time, it still makes me laugh to think how his world must have ended when he realised what he'd done. What's a fatal crosspost? Jennifer asked. I know that one, Raw blurted, a small piece of chicken erupting from his mouth in Indigo's direction. The look on her face could not have been more horrified had she been shot. It's when you accidentally type something into the wrong person's box. He turned to me and I flinched, involuntarily, fearing more pizza-topping projectiles. Didn't you invent that term, Leonard? I did not, I replied tightly. You're thinking of hacks. Not just typing any old thing into the wrong person's box. Rainey snatched back her conch. A fatal crosspost is typing the worst thing you could possibly type into the wrong person's box. In this case, and I quote, "Baby, let me just get rid of Rainey and I'll be over to kiss your shoulders." Indigo gasped and put her hand over her mouth. Oh no, said Jennifer. Oh my God, said Mary Ann. I know, right? What an idiot. I mean, at the time it was like a dagger to my heart and everything, world ending and all that. I just replied, what? And straight away, just like that, he went offline. That is so embarrassing, laughed Raw. Oh my God, I would want to die, said Mary Ann. If you were Rainey or if you were Rocker, the builder asked. Both. I must admit, Jennifer said, looking down at her plate, I've dropped a few fatal crossposts of my own in my time. Every one of them made a little piece of my brain commit suicide, I think. I fear that we can most of us probably think of at least one such moment of our own doing, Edward commented, looking slightly guilty for the first time in the 6 months I had known him. Though not necessarily, he added, looking at Rainey, of such a infidelitous nature. Come on, Edward, said Indigo, grinning. Spill the beans. Oh, it was a very long time ago now, the white-haired man told us. I made a terribly disparaging remark about a fellow avatar's role-playing ability, thinking I was making it to a close friend when, in fact, I was making it to said avatar. He swallowed. My toes still clench to think of it. The memory of my own first fatal crosspost floated briefly into mind, and I felt a thin sweat break out across my palms. I reburied it immediately. Well, since we're on the subject, said Indigo, Hargreaves and I have a doozy for you. And for the first time in several minutes, our digital guest in the laptop at the far end of the table spoke up and loudly. No, 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 Indy, he cried, waving his hands in alarm across the screen. Don't do it, I beg of you. His name was Hargreaves Amber, and he was Indigo's business partner in the metaverse. She made the skins, and he marketed them. He'd created a quite dazzling in-world shop for her creations and managed all the technicalities of sales, including the packaging of each product and its listing on all the various web presences. He introduced himself as the brawn to her beautiful brain. I have to admit, not being all that much of a shopper in the virtual world, I hadn't heard of the Indigo brand when I first met the fellow members of the club. Once I was sensitive to her name, however, I started seeing it all over the place in the various online metaverse commentaries. There was no denying that her skins were quite stunning. She had quite the talent for photorealism, though she insisted that all her work was hand-painted. Unlike all of the previous meetings with a guest diner in digital presence, and much to Raw's disappointment, Hargreaves had no problem for us to solve. Since the previous meeting had finished with no apparent solution to our then guest's issue, only I knew different on that, it was starting to feel like the mystery-solving function of our little group was beginning to dissolve. Hargreaves was a cheerful, handsome, well-groomed man, and he'd gone to some effort for the meal, putting on a very well-tailored suit and seating himself in an actual restaurant somewhere in Boston. He was very polite, He accepted without reservation the club rules of confidentiality and everyone remaining in their metaverse character. He chatted knowledgeably about all the various technical, cultural, and political issues of the metaverse. It all felt terribly ordinary. And he'd maintained an almost perfect reserve all the way through our conversation, right up until this moment. Sorry, Hargreaves, Indigo said playfully, swirling her wine as she spoke. I am never going to stop reminding you of this. I can't listen to this, he replied, and covered his face with his menu. I spent a brief moment contemplating pointing out to him that obscuring his vision would do little to obstruct his hearing, but then the moment was gone. So this was a couple of years ago now, Indigo began. Back when I was only just getting started designing skins. I only knew Harden as a friend of my ex, Richard. Well, he wasn't my ex at the time. It was a busy evening at the club, and Richard was off somewhere or another, and I had Har in one of my windows doing his thing of talking about market trends in mesh or whatever. For a few minutes he went silent. No big deal there. I'm always switching conversations myself. And then he suddenly said this. I can't say I blame you for wanting out, Richard. I agree. Indy bores the crap out of me too. A chorus of collective gasps broke out from around the table. Oh, God, the menu on the laptop screen whimpered. If you were physically here, I would punch you, Hargreaves, Rainey said to the laptop. She pointed at the screen with her fork. And put that menu down so we can see that you're suitably apologetic. Slowly, Hargreaves uncovered his face. I deserve that punch and more, he admitted. Oh, he was suitably apologetic, Indigo chuckled. I don't think a second passed before the OMGs started coming in from him. OMG, Indy. OMG, I'm so sorry. OMG, I didn't mean it, Indy. OMG, I'm such a jerk. And so on, and so on, and so on. Rainey nodded. Quite right, too. I didn't really think that about Indy, Hargreaves said, somewhat weakly. To be honest, I didn't really think anything of her. I hardly knew her at the time. But I did want Richard to like me. I was just being an idiot, trying to appease a friend. Edward spoke up. You were at Indigo's club at the time? Hargreaves nodded slowly. I went there looking for Richard. Geez, you could have just IM'd him, Raw commented through a mouthful of pizza. Yes, of course, Hargreaves replied. It's just that I've been IMing him a lot and I was worried I was becoming a pest. It's somehow less intrusive to IM someone who's physically nearby. You were looking for a pretext, Jennifer said. Yes, I guess that's right. Talk about a man crush, Raw chuckled. The table went suddenly thoughtful for a moment, and then all eyes turned back to Hargreaves, who sighed and said, Well, yes, exactly. Ah, I see, said Mary Ann and Rainey and Jennifer and me. What? Asked Raw. What do you see? Indigo replied, deadpan, Hargreaves was in love with my ex. You were trying to steal him from her, exclaimed Rainey. Well, now look, said Hargreaves, flustered. It's not like I mean, it was him who told me he was unhappy. I mean, what would anyone do in my situation? Jennifer said, kindly, you saw an opportunity. Yeah, Hargreaves replied quietly. I saw an opportunity. Richard is bisexual? Edward inquired. Straight as a Colorado border, Indigo replied. In fairness to Har, he didn't know that. Richard's boasts about our male, female threesomes were quite outrageous. She took a quick sip from her wine glass, and I wondered if she was blushing beneath her beautiful black skin. But in reality, he was one to establish some very strict boundaries before such encounters. She cleared her throat. More's the pity. There was an awkward silence. I attempted to fill it by mentioning that Colorado's borders are not in actual fact perfectly straight, but my contribution went unacknowledged. So I guess we can conclude 3 things then, said Rainey finally. 1, you and Hargreaves made things up. 2, Hargreaves and Richard never got together. And 3, that was the moment when Richard became your ex. Oh yeah, replied Indigo. That jerk was history. To tell you the truth, I was starting to get tired of him anyway. He couldn't see the point in me setting up a skin business when I already had the club to run. He was always complaining that I didn't spend enough time with him, though when I had a busy night and could have done with him around to help out, he was, of course, nowhere to be seen. Typical man, commented Rainey, only interested in one thing. Exactly. So in a way, Har did me a favour. Why did you start designing skins? I asked. 3 reasons, she replied. First, clubs just don't bring in the money. Everyone thinks they're a cash cow until they actually start trying to run one. You've got to constantly keep working in order to get even close to making them pay, event after event after event. A good skin, on the other hand, just sells and sells long after you've finished making it. Second, I was fed up with the lack of black skins to be found in the metaverse. To quote Raw, the range was diabolical. And third, Indigo continued, I love creating skins. It's such a calming thing to do. I lose all track of time when I'm doing it. And then there's the pleasure of seeing people walking around wearing my work. It's given my virtual life a whole new focus. Your skins are a huge success, Marianne said to her. I have 2 myself. Why did you keep your club? Oh, I love my club, Indigo replied. It's my home in the metaverse. I have regulars and everything, a real little community. I love tinkering with it and adding extra detail. Now that I'm not spending so much time organising events there, its income has dropped, but that's okay, because my skin sales fund it. With plenty left over, remarked Hargreaves from the laptop. For which I have you to be thankful for, she said. To us, she added, I would have been just a small little dot on the market if it wasn't for Har. I love creating skins, but I loathe all the faff involved in actually selling them. Pictures have to be taken, descriptions have to be written, note cards have to be made up, and then there's the distribution to all the fashion bloggers to sort out. I hate it. But that stuff is what he excels in. Weren't you mad at him for what he said? Asked Marianne. Sure I was, but I was furious at Richard. Har was more of an acquaintance back then, and who can be really mad at someone you don't actually know all that well? Who indeed? Edward remarked. And he was so utterly contrite. And when I learned the reason for what he'd said, I just couldn't help but feel a little sorry for him, because I knew he would never get what he longed for. So I didn't stay mad for long. And then, of course, we got talking about the skin business, and the rest is history. Edward said, with a slight smile at the very edges of his lips. And I suppose Richard denied all knowledge of the conversation? Totally, the worm. Actually, that's what sealed it for me. He couldn't even man up and admit to what he'd said. We were through by the end of the evening. I put him on mute. I haven't spoken to him a word since. Good girl, Rainey said, and raised her glass in front of Jennifer. Indigo chinked it. To think, I was contemplating making him into my business partner. Ah, yes, Edward muttered quietly. Yes, indeed. The 60-something man was rubbing his chin thoughtfully and nodding slightly. What are you thinking, Edward? I asked. Oh, nothing, my dear fellow. Nothing of consequence. Things have all worked out for the better, after all. Indigo looked at him and frowned. You have that look on your face, where you've worked something out, Edward. Come on, mister, I enjoy the non-verbals of real-life conversation. Out with it. Our founder looked genuinely conflicted for a moment. Then he sighed and looked across at the laptop screen. You'll forgive me, Hargreaves, but in this case, my conscience pushes me towards the truth. I genuinely hope that the outcome of this is peaceful. The two of you are clearly good for each other. To Indigo, he said, I'm sorry, my dear, but I think in this case what you experienced wasn't a fatal crosspost at all. She looked confused. I don't understand, Edward. What do you mean? I mean, he said, that Hargreaves didn't accidentally type that remark into your window. He did so quite deliberately. Now wait just a goddamn minute, Hargreaves blurted, his face suddenly red, and I realised it was the first time that evening we'd seen him blush. He probably reckoned he wasn't close enough to hurt you so deeply with his remark that a friendship couldn't be constructed if the appropriate level of complete remorse was applied, Edward continued, his voice firmer. And what's more, he came up with the perfect reason for saying what he said that no human with a heart could possibly be cold to. Oh yes, he said, wagging his finger at the screen. You saw an opportunity, all right, young man. A talented content creator just starting out, capable of earning a small fortune with the right support. And the only thing between you and a piece of that was Richard. I, stammered Hargreaves, and then he reached forward to his laptop, and our screen went blank. Wait, are you saying he isn't gay? Roar asked. I said nothing of the sort, Edward replied. That is a matter of no relevance here. Indigo was sitting in stunned silence, staring into her wine glass. Edward put his hand over hers and said in a quiet voice, I'm sorry, my dear. It's okay, she said in a whisper. As you say, it's the truth. It has to be. But, Edward, what made you suspect him? You said that he started apologizing immediately after the crosspost. One thing that all of us who have committed that particular act know is that the first thing you experience is complete and utter shock, abject horror, overwhelming guilt, disbelief at what you have just done, an inability to think, let alone say anything rational. He pointed at the blank screen, as in fact we have just observed. No one, Edward said, just apologizes immediately. And that was Some Fatal Crossposts. That was story 6 of the Avatar Dining Club. And so the first 12 stories of the Avatar Dining Club Mysteries, they're published in a book called The Avatar Dining Club Mysteries. Thank you very much. If you look on the book stand over on the side of the Stump Theatre, you can see a copy of the Avatar Dining Club Mysteries. If you're interested in it, you can give it a click, and it'll take you to a web page about the book. So that's a story that was published some time ago. So for the Fantasy Fair, I've written a brand new story. This is story 14 in the sequence. Now, for this, that last story I was actually reading from a physical book, from my own copy. So for this one, I'm going to have to switch over to Google Docs. So I'm not going to be able to see the screen if people type anything in. So if I don't know, disappear from voice or whatever, if someone could come into voice and just interrupt me to let me know. So some of you will know that I've recently been dabbling in a bit of machinima, and released a film in December last year called Varhide, and I decided to write a story about that was kind of drew upon a little bit of the business of filming in Second Life. So this story is called The Director's Explosion. I'm just going to transfer over to Google Docs now, and we'll start the story. Everyone, I announced, say hello to Herman Hennemore. The 6 regular members of the Avatar Dining Club took it in turns to lean forward and greet our guest, who was, as usual, hosted on the laptop at the end of the table. To my left, the young builder, Raw Concrete, raised his glass of cola in greeting. On his left, and at the opposing end of the table, our club founder and host, Edward, gave out one of his booming hellos. Continuing in this clockwise direction, there was club owner and skin designer Indigo Williams, fashion photographer and blogger Jennifer Bitt, Vanilla Sharp, previously known to us as Rainy September, then the laptop, and finally to my right sat Mary Ann Middlemarch, also a fashion blogger. Thank you, everyone, Herman said. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Leonard. Herman's a virtual world movie maker, I told the group. We all know who Herman is, Indigo informed me. But what you don't know, I added proudly, is that he's going to be adapting one of my novels into a machinima. Really? Vanilla exclaimed. Well, you kept that one a secret. Which one? The Hawks Peak incident, I announced, and watched the faces around the table slowly turn to blank expressions. My science fiction novel? I added. The one set during a mission to Mars. Frowns, shaking heads. I sighed. You should have stuck to writing stories set in the metaverse, Raw told me. I'll never understand why you abandoned that. I haven't abandoned that, I exclaimed. I just wanted to try something different. It's always the same, the young man continued. People can't just stick to what they're good at. Good at? Indigo queried. You are most welcome, Herman, Edward said hurriedly. I trust Leonard has briefed you well on our club rule? Herman nodded. He has indeed. No real-life information. I heartily approve. To be honest, I initially said no to his invitation, but when he outlined that requirement, all my concerns disappeared. Well, now you have me curious, Indigo said, and stopped talking at the sight of Edward's sternly raised finger. Sorry. How goes it with the hunt for a mountaintop location, Herman? I asked eagerly. Ah, yes, Leonard, our guest replied. Good news on that front. I visited a new region just yesterday that I think's going to be perfect. A quite stunning installation. Beautiful views, and just the right amount of seclusion and space for that space observatory you picked out last week on our shopping trip. You said you were going to buy a new sweater, Vanilla exclaimed, giving me an accusing glare. You never said anything about picking up a space observatory. I did get a new sweater, I protested. The space observatory was sort of an impulse buy. They had it on special offer, and I needed one anyway. Oh, and I also bought a flock of migrating geese. I thought they might look good over our new house. I love metaverse shopping, Jennifer said happily. Is anyone else cuting out over Vanilla and Leonard living together now? Indigo asked, grinning from ear to ear. But Vanilla threw her hands up in despair. Leonard, we have too much stuff already. You're breaking the region with all the high-poly junk you just keep bringing home. Last night, most of the living room furniture refused to res, and the roses in the front garden looked like concrete origami. The day before that, the bathtub was just a set of 4 claw feet on the floor, and the day before that, half the walls of the house were missing. I shook my head defiantly. As I keep telling you, that's nothing to do with me. We're well within our prim limit. The landlord just needs to do a region restart. If the worst thing he wants to install at your house is a flock of migrating geese, then you're doing pretty well, Indigo commented. Anyway, I've spoken with the mountain region owner, Herman continued, and she's more than happy for us to place the observatory there, provided it's not for more than an hour or so at a time. But that's fine. So long as I note down the coordinates, I'll be able to place it in the exact same position each time we shoot there. To avoid continuity errors, I explained to everyone, proud to be able to demonstrate my new filming knowledge. Is that the new place everyone's been photographing lately? Jennifer asked. with all the low-hanging cloud. I did a photo shoot there a few days ago of a new ski suit that's just been released. But isn't there a lodge on the mountain top? There is indeed, Herman replied, a very large one. So how will that fit in with your secluded space observatory? Oh, that's no problem at all, he said. I'll simply de-render it. A couple of clicks and it'll be gone. Gone on my screen, at least. Which is, after all, where the camera is, I added, knowingly. Enrico, our impeccable waiter, arrived with the main course, wisely placing the various salad and pasta dishes first, before bringing Raw his pizza, so that everyone else had a head start on him. The young builder's scowl at his order of presentation quickly disappeared as he launched his surprise assault on the large chicken and pepperoni carnivore put in front of him. Presently, Edward waved his finger at the laptop screen. Pennymore, he said thoughtfully. Now I remember. Didn't you film a production of a well-known Scottish play I was in a few years back? Ah, yes, Herman replied. The live performance. Yes, that was me. My gosh, that was a challenge. Really? Edward seemed surprised. I must say you came across as a very calm, collected, and in-control fellow at the time. That was because I'm very good at knowing when to turn off my microphone so people don't hear me swearing. Herman laughed. Well, until recently, that is. The problem with that production was that it was live. I'm used to taking as much time as I need to compose shots and plan the movement I want in them before filming. Plus, I'll then reshoot the same scene from one or two different angles before moving on. But when you're filming a live show, you have no time to think or frame at all. In the end, I must have attended at least 10 different performances of that production before I had all the footage I needed. And editing down from all that was a nightmare. We were sold out for 4 consecutive weeks, Edward said to us proudly. I played the title role. What a fine time that was. 28 evenings of saying the same lines over and over in front of the laptop in my study, and I could have said them for 28 evenings more and not felt even remotely tired of them. He raised his arm dramatically. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Wow, whispered Indigo, her eyes slightly wet. We all broke out into applause. Actually, a few of the diners on the surrounding tables joined in with us. Our white-haired host smiled and thanked us humbly. So who's that by? Asked Raw. For the second time that evening, Edward had to silence Indigo with a raised finger. He explained it patiently to the young builder. Meanwhile, Vanilla said to Herman, You mentioned you were good at knowing when to turn off your microphone until recently. What happened? Our guest, who was taking a bite out of a piece of garlic bread, reddened slightly. He took a moment to recompose himself. It was just a couple of weeks ago, he said finally. I suppose you could say that I committed the voice equivalent of a fatal crosspost. Uh-oh, commented Jennifer. Herman nodded solemnly. I was certain I'd just turned the microphone off, but it transpired that it hadn't been on in the first place. So when I clicked the mic icon, it in fact switched from off to on, and then I said some very unkind things about the region owner, which I thought only I could hear. Instead, everyone heard them. Ouch, said Indigo, and I'm guessing the region owner was present at the time. You guessed correctly, he confirmed, reddening again at the memory. Involuntarily, we all winced at the thought of it. So you were filming when you had your outburst? I asked him. Yes, in a stunning urban build that I've used a couple of times before. A beautiful fusion of architectural styles, old and new. So detailed. The most recent film I used it for was about a year ago. That historical drama you like, Leonard. He sighed. Well, now it's a place I'll never be allowed to film in again. Ah, I said. So that's why you need a few extra weeks before starting on Hawk's Peak. Indeed, Herman replied. I have to find a new location. It's not just the scenes I hadn't yet filmed there that I have to shoot in it. I now have to reshoot in the new location all the scenes I filmed at the old one before. To avoid continuity errors, Indigo explained to me. And it's not just a question of simply finding a place and then getting on with it. There's all the actors to assemble once more, several of them, all from different time zones across the planet. And two of the scenes I shot there had a whole bunch of extras moving about in the background as well. Never mind the technical challenges of filming. The sheer logistics of setting up a scene can be a nightmare by itself. Herman sighed once more. Me and my big mouth. Edward said, Don't be too hard on yourself, dear fellow. I must say I've seen my fair share of directorial outbursts in the various real-life productions I've taken part in. It seems to be a trait that goes with the role. I suppose a key advantage of being a director of metaverse films must be that ordinarily you get to hide all your own personal explosions. As you say, Edward, Herman replied, ordinarily. Why do directors need to have explosions anyway? Marianne asked. There's no real excuse for it at all, Herman replied. If I absolutely had to give a reason, then I'd say it has to be about control over one's creation. When Leonard here is writing a novel, everything that happens is up to him. He doesn't have to rely upon anyone else at all. The director, on the other hand, has many different people to coordinate. Actors, stagehands, musicians, publicity. Any one of those people can cause the whole project to go off in a different direction from the vision you have in your head. And in your case, it would appear, region owners, Indigo said. Oh, metaverse filming adds plenty of people to that list, Herman replied, a note of exasperation creeping into his voice. Region owners, sure, the biggest issue being them closing their place down before you've finished filming there. Entirely their right, he added hurriedly. I don't want to sound ungrateful for being allowed to use their locations. That wasn't my issue with Stella, by the way. But then there's also region users crawling all over the place, and don't even get me started on role players. I dated a paragraph role player once, Indigo said. It took him 3 hours just to unbutton his shirt. I spent most of the time browsing on eBay. So what was it the region owner did that cheesed you off? Vanilla asked. Stella, said Herman. Well, it wasn't so much what she did as what she didn't do. Her region badly needed a restart. You know how it is with the metaverse. All those scripts and avatar attachments and excessively detailed textures take their toll on the servers running Sims. Stuff starts to break after a while. Animation servers stop working, lag builds up. More importantly, just as you experience Vanilla, objects sometimes just fail to appear. I'd asked her time and time again to do it, and each time I got there to film, it was no different. I really needed to do a few wide-angle shots that took in the whole town, slow pan across the rooftops, a rising crane up from the streets, that sort of thing. But it was impossible with half the buildings gone. What was infuriating about the whole thing, he continued energetically, was that she kept telling me that she had done a restart, an out-and-out lie. I actually think she set the whole thing up just to annoy me. It's the only explanation that makes sense. Why would she want to annoy you? Raw asked, scooping up his final slice of pizza. I did a double take at his now empty plate. This was fast, even for him. Opposite, Indigo was staring at the builder as though she was in a hypnotic trance, a look of faint horror on her face. I'm pretty sure she's fed up with me filming there, our guest replied. In fairness, I suppose it is a bit of an imposition. If it was just a one-off shoot, then that would be one thing, but when you're returning over and resing your own props and scenery items there as well, which might ruin the look of the place from their perspective, then it's another thing entirely. Of course, the first time I asked her, a couple of years back, she was delighted. I don't think she fully realised what saying yes entailed, though. The second time I asked her, I noted that her agreement was noticeably less enthusiastic. Maybe she was just having a bad day, Jennifer suggested. It was pointedly less enthusiastic, Herman insisted. I remember it quite clearly. The first time she said yes, it was with an exclamation point and a smiley face. The second time, she just said, sure. No exclamation point and no smiley. Ouch, Vanilla remarked. It's a remarkable memory you have for conversation, Jennifer commented. I might have recently checked my chat logs on that point, Herman replied. He coughed. Indigo tore her gaze from Raw to send a look of perplexion in Herman's direction. I don't understand. If she didn't want you to film there anymore, then why didn't she say just that? Maybe you should ask her, Herman snapped. How should I know? Maybe she didn't want to come off looking like the bad guy? Maybe she was worried I'd complain about her in public, which, FYI, I never would have. I've no idea. Not everyone is quite so direct as you are, Indigo, I pointed out, and added hurriedly, in your uniquely delightful manner, which I personally find refreshing and value enormously. Case in point, Vanilla said, smirking. So you're saying she deliberately maintained her sim in a state of poor repair in order that you become frustrated and throw a tantrum so that she'd then have a morally defensible excuse for banning you? Vanilla sat back, folded her arms and shook her head. Nope, I don't buy it. I've known people do worse stuff than that out of spite, Marianne commented. Oh, spite, I have no problem with. Spite I'm fully familiar with and embrace with all my heart. What I don't believe is that she thought it all through like that in advance. You're joining up dots to make a picture that doesn't exist. How could she have known you'd have an outburst? Edward just remarked that you typically come across as calm and collected. I'm not saying she masterminded it at all, like some nefarious scheme, Herman replied. I'm just saying that she was probably irritated by me and, yes, didn't do the restart out of spite. Then when my tantrum happened, she saw it as a golden opportunity. By the way, some people seem to like poking calm and collected people. That last part is certainly true, I mused. I've been told my own calm and collectedness in world comes off as aloof and insecure and insincere. All those profile comments that people post about hating drama, and when someone actually does try to raise themselves above all the petty squabbles, they get branded as cold and uncaring. Exactly, Herman said. Well, I think you're just projecting annoyance onto her out of your own sense of guilt at imposing on sim owners, Indigo said. There are probably loads of reasons why she never got around to doing the restart. It would probably have been a huge inconvenience to her. For example, there might have been people looking around the place that she didn't want to kick out when she found that she had the time to do it. Then why not simply say that? Herman asked. Why pretend that she'd done it? Because that's the sort of excuse people give the first time they're asked, but are embarrassed to give the second or third time. Simple. She was probably fully expecting to do the restart in her own good time and just wanted you off her back on the issue. What sort of stuff were you rezzing there? Raw asked absently, whilst he eyed up the desserts menu. Maybe you took her close to her prim limit so she couldn't place anything herself whilst your stuff was there. That would have annoyed me for sure. Oh, I came nowhere near that, Herman replied. I always check that sort of thing. My impact actually wasn't all that much at all. Just a few bits and pieces here and there. Well, that and the movement markers. Movement markers? Jennifer inquired. I leaned forwards to explain this point in a knowledgeable manner, but Herman beat me to it. I use them when I'm filming a busy scene when there's more than one person moving around, he said. Like a street scene, for example, when there's other folk walking up and down in the background. They're part of a special system I use to coordinate and synchronize them. What's to coordinate if they're just walking around? Raw asked. Oh gosh, if I left it to people to just walk however they wanted, it would be a nightmare, Herman laughed. They'd be starting at different moments, bumping into each other, walking into walls and vehicles. It's a lot harder to walk in a straight line in the metaverse than people think it is. So, I use different marker routes for different avatars. Each person sits on their designated starting point, and all I have to do is click a button for everyone to begin walking their route according to the markers I've laid out along it. So, how many markers had you laid out? Jennifer asked him. Well now, let's see. Herman paused to do some mental calculation. Probably around 300? 300? Raw blurted, sufficiently astonished that he actually stopped looking at the menu. And you wonder why she's annoyed at you? What did these things look like? But they only take up one prim each, and Stella still had only over 2,000 prims free, Herman protested. The starting points are little orange cubes, and the movement markers are little triangles pointing in the direction of travel, a different colour for each route. But once I've arranged them how I want, I click another button to make every last one of them invisible. What's more, they're automatically phantom. Any avatar who unknowingly walks into one will pass straight through it without ever knowing there was something there. I'm not saying you're wrong, Raw, but she had no rational reason to be angry at me for that. Even if they had been inconveniencing her, then she could at any time have just auto-returned the whole lot to me at her own click of a button. Well, I'm saying Raw's wrong, Indigo said, though there's nothing especially new about me saying that. If all these gizmos were invisible and massless, and if they didn't take her anywhere near her prim limit, then to all extents and purposes, they weren't there. What's to get annoyed about? Except, said Raw, suddenly excited, they were still there. They were there so far as the region was concerned. I bet each one of those 300 objects had its own script running in it, and scripts are notorious for creating lag. 300 scripts, all running simultaneously. Yes, there's your lag source. It had nothing to do with Stella not doing a restart. In fact, she was probably telling you the truth when she said she'd done one. It was your own system that was causing your problems. Please don't do your victory dance, Indigo said to him, but I could tell she was actually quite impressed this time at the young builder's hypothesis. All around the table, there were thoughtful nods of acknowledgement at this idea. Except from Herman. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, he said, but the system just doesn't work like that. Movement markers aren't scripted at all. The only things scripted are the starting points, which physically move along the route, taking their avatar with them. And at most, there was only 9 or 10 of those. The markers are identified by the starting points according to their name and orientation. They're effectively passive signposts. Right, said Raw, deflated. Yeah, that would do it. But like I said, none of this logic means that she couldn't have been irrationally annoyed by the stuff I put down. Maybe she just didn't like knowing that stuff was there, commented Vanilla, gazing levelly at me as she said it. Fine, I said. I won't res the geese. She grinned at me sweetly with a mixture of affection and triumph. I still say you are inventing secret annoyance on her part as a way of justifying your frustration and outburst to yourself, Indigo stated resolutely. You feel bad about it, which is good, but leave it at that. Stop trying to conjure up some backstory to reduce your feelings of guilt over behaving badly. I'm telling you, Herman said stubbornly. She resented me being there. I could just feel it. And I'm telling you that you're probably imagining that. Edward broke the slightly awkward silence which ensued by clearing his throat. Perhaps I might be of service here, dear fellow, he said to Herman tentatively. I can't help but wonder if young Raw might have been right in thinking it possible that Stella did, in fact, do the restart after all. No, it's not possible, Edward, Herman said flatly, now looking distinctly unimpressed by the whole experience of being a guest at our table. I realized some post-meeting soothing was likely to be necessary if my filming project was going to proceed. Half the buildings in that sim were missing every time. If she'd carried out a region restart, then they'd have been there. I have, of course, experienced exactly the phenomenon you're describing on several occasions, our white-haired host continued, unbothered by the denial. But as Vanilla was saying earlier, when that happens, it usually seems to be different things that are missing each time you enter the broken region. I'm wondering if, in your case, it was the same buildings that were absent every time? Herman thought about it. Well, it's not like I did any sort of audit, he said, after a moment. I never was especially good at recognizing things that are missing. But now that you mention it, yes, I think it was the same stuff that was gone each time. But so what? You said to Leonard that one of the projects you filmed previously in this particular place was a historical drama. Yes. But you also mentioned that the region is a fusion of architectural styles, so presumably that includes modern buildings too, which wouldn't have been consistent with your historical setting? Well, of course, Herman said impatiently. But that's simple. It's just like the Mountain Lodge. I took care of those buildings by de-rendering them. He stopped talking. Then he said, Oh. Indigo snorted. You de-rendered them permanently and forgot to undo it. Oh, well done, Edward. Well done indeed. Oh dear, Herman said. In my experience, Edward said to him kindly, people usually respond well to an apology when it's sincerely made. Perhaps you should go and make one to Stella when our meal is over. Who knows, Leonard, he added to me. Maybe your movie will start filming on schedule after all. And that was The Director's Explosion, the latest Avatar Dining Club mystery. And I will add that from time to time, the twists in the Avatar Dining Club stories have a link to my own experience, and that particular twist is it didn't happen quite that way for me, but there was a sim which I used for Stonewall, my first feature-length machinima, and I had to de-render just loads and loads of stuff in the sim because I only wanted a particular feature to be in the movie. If you've seen the movie, it's the place where Epi Stonewall is chasing the quill and they fly over a submerged plane in the water. So that was a feature at this sim, and I de-rendered loads of other stuff so it would look like it was out in the middle of the sea. And then for weeks afterwards, it never occurred to me that I'd permanently de-rendered all this stuff, and I kept on bugging the sim owner that she needed to do a restart. And she couldn't understand it, and I couldn't understand. I didn't have an outburst of any type, not in voice, not in chat. I wasn't actually filming there or anything. But every time I went there, I said, I still can't see what's going on here. I don't understand this. And then finally, at some point, the penny dropped, and I realised I simply hadn't unde-rendered it. So yeah, there's a basis of reality in that story. Well, I hope you enjoyed our story time this evening. And as I said, if you fancy listening to more Avatar Dining Club mysteries, there is the podcast which you can listen to, or of course you can read them in text on the blog or in the book. And we're all done. So thank you. Don't forget to donate to the Relay for Life. Thank you for your support for that, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. Those were great stories and great fun.